Hello all and good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Building Cloud-Based Mobile Testing with Real Mobile Devices. We've got Rainforest QA and AWS Device Farm with us today. My name's Joe. I'm the Demand Gen Marketing Manager at Rainforest. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd just like to do some quick housekeeping. Throughout our discussion today, please submit your questions in the lower box of the control console. We'll have time at the end of the webinar for our speakers to answer them. And we'll also be recording this webinar and we'll send that out to you later today with the slides. So with that being said, Russ and Trent, take it away.
So today we're talking about building cloud-based testing on mobile devices, but with real mobile devices, no emulation here or simulation. So who's speaking? It's me, Russell Smith. I'm the CTO of Rainforest QA. And also we've got with us Trent. So Trent, say hi.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining. My name is Trent Peterson. I'm the product manager for AWS Device Farm, which is a service that allows mobile developers to test and validate their applications on real phones and tablets before going to market.
Cool. So Rainforest QA, if you don't already know, is a mobile, well, it's a QA platform. We also have a mobile QA platform as well. It lets you test on devices using humans, but at the speed of QA, CD, so really, really fast. Okay, so just some overall stats on mobile. It's exploding. It's totally insane how big these numbers are. So there's 140 billion smartphones sold in 2015. That seems far too high. And then 17 billion app downloads in Q1. 3 trillion in revenue generated by mobile market alone. And then over 50% of traffic now on e-commerce sites is mobile traffic. So this is pretty crazy, but the number of app downloads is by far the craziest for us. We're talking about app testing today, so yeah. Mobile testing is essential, of course, because quality is super essential. If you don't have a good quality app, people are going to churn super fast. They'll load your app once and then just disappear. Also, it's pretty difficult because there's such a combination of devices, operating systems, platforms, and different users with different stuff on their phones. So, Trent, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think one thing to mention is, you pointed out those really big numbers, and I think everyone is pretty well aware now that quality is, a differentiator at this point. And because consumers have a very loud voice through market reviews and so on, application quality can make or break an application. And when it comes to testing on devices, we like to talk about lots of devices, operating systems, phones, tablets. I think there's a lot of lip service paid to the form factor of the devices, but that's just really the tip of the iceberg. Besides the fact that there are thousands of different devices out in the wild, you also are dealing with carrier and manufacturers modifying firmware. You're dealing with end users with the expectation that your app is going to work whether they're on their phone, their tablet, or their TV, but the environment can change, right? So they might be in their car with a fairly decent connection, but then they're at home and they might have a substandard connection, but they don't know that, right? And if your app doesn't perform and let them know, that can lead to those bad reviews. So,
Yeah.
So it's not just lots of devices, right? I think that's kind of the key.
It's also, I think, the general underlying trend here that at least we've noticed, I'm sure you have as well, is that the expectation of quality is so much higher than it was, say, 2 or 3 years ago. The bar for what is acceptable has just shot up. And I think, for me, that's partly because testing has become, more required, but also there's just way more apps, so there's way more choice. The voice of users being able to give critical feedback and then choose a better app over yours is also added to that, I think. Does that sound in line with what you've seen as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think we have to be careful not to sound like we're, FUD kind of situation, right? Where we're just saying it's really scary out there. I think that there are things in place and tools in place and development practices that are evolving to address this, right? But yeah, I think we're in a situation where quality is truly everything.
Yeah, I'd agree. So you were diving in a bit on this trend about mobile devices. It's partly tons of devices, partly carrier, partly different situations. Do you want to talk a little bit more about those in detail? I'm kind of interested in the carrier stuff.
Sure. So when it comes to carriers, there are different types of modifications that are done. Some are not as obtrusive. So things like installing additional applications, right? So there's just lots and lots of apps that come pre-installed on the phones, and you can't necessarily uninstall them. So you have to deal with performance issues that incurs. There's background processes and all sorts of things running. So there's that aspect. There are also things where certain settings might be completely disabled if you go into the settings panel, or certain modifications may have been done to disable or modify various behaviors. So things like interacting with the camera or setting up a hotspot, those things might be modified in some way. And we've seen phones work one way on one carrier and a different way on another. And then yeah, and one other note there is just on the manufacturer side. So it's not just phones and tablets, but also the radios, the Bluetooth stacks, and so on. And those can cause all sorts of really interesting issues.
So Trent, before services like Device Farm, how are companies dealing with this? Because it's like we've seen some companies build their own like internal version of Device Farm, and that could range from anything from them having like 20 devices on a table, which is the super old school way, which I guess covers some of this, through to trying to build their own literal device farm and sometimes succeeding, but most of the time struggling with it after a while. So like, how have you seen the range of things happen?
Right. I think that everybody's probably seen or has a desk or a table somewhere that's just covered in phones and tablets, or their cupboards somewhere. And I think that that's kind of where everybody starts. Is you start off with a couple devices, it starts to grow. Larger enterprises, larger companies with more resources will have full-on device labs. They might have rooms and rooms of devices. Now, besides the fact that people are buying devices, or we're buying those devices, there's also the maintenance, keeping track of who has what. Do we have enough of this device for all of our developers? And then also, when you get to a certain scale, it's not just you have all of these devices, you can no longer manually test on them. So you have to set up automation. And if you're going to automate tests across all of those devices, how do you actually rig that up? What kind of system do you put in place? And suddenly you have engineers building automation infrastructure, device management software, and they're no longer focused on the core business, actually building a great app that delights customers.
So it's basically like the way I like to explain Device Farm is it's basically EC2 but for phones. So the older way of doing this is basically the equivalent of building and racking your own servers, and then also writing the software to manage all those. And like Device Farm allows companies like us and also end users to do that in the EC2 way, as in spin it up, use it for a while, and then just throw it away and start again. As far as I can tell. Does it make sense?
Right. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess like the interesting one for me is also like, even if you use Device Farm or if you build it in-house, the question around mobile testing for me is always who ends up executing the tests. So if you're doing automation, you normally would need somebody in-house to write the automation, even if you're using Device Farm. Or if you're building the things we were talking about before, like a physical lab, you also need that person or a manual person and the person to build and rack the phones. So I'd be super curious to see what do you find engineers are writing the tests, or dedicated QE people are writing the tests generally for Device Farm?
I think it varies from customer to customer. I think one really interesting thing is the evolution of what QA does. So I think we're seeing a shift from the sort of old school way of where you have QA engineers and you have development, and they're two completely separate organizations, and developers toss over a new build and the QA team starts hammering away and testing. What we've seen is there's this evolution, especially in terms of mobile, where the QA team is more in charge of actually putting in place the infrastructure and tooling to make testing possible, but developers are actually writing and maintaining the tests. So engineers are creating the tests, running the tests, and QA is more like the facilitators. They're the ones that are putting together the dashboards and setting up device farm and all of that.
So yeah, we've seen that exact trend as well. So it's more treated like, say, I don't know, like a build team would have been. So a team that gives you the infrastructure to do your job, but the job of doing the actual testing is generally moved on to developers now. Though with some of our customers, we also see it being a QE or QA role still. So like with Rainforest, we also have PMs writing tests. So Rainforest allows you to move that job from either to a developer or to a slightly less technical user like a PM, which is kind of cool. So like cost-wise, do you have any numbers on how building your own device lab or doing testing on your own devices is cost-effective, or how cost-effective it is compared to device farm?
So without going into specific numbers, I think like one thing that just we sort of repeat over and over again, and we see people struggle with, is that the initial expense of buying a device is not really indicative of the overall expense, right? So you have to consider that, okay, we're buying devices, as I mentioned before, you're building the infrastructure, you're maintaining a lab, so now you have real estate involved with this, you potentially have server racks and so on. And now like just doing the quick numbers in your head, it's okay, we've gone from buying a few $500 to $800 phones to having full-time staffing, we have a room dedicated to this. Like those numbers add up real quick, and that number of devices that you have to support just continues to grow every week, every month. There are more devices that you would like to test on, whereas device farm, we kind of take that whole problem and we say, okay, for a flat rate you can test on the cloud on the latest and greatest, and the old devices, high end, low end, it doesn't matter, and you don't have to worry about management. We take care of all of that for you.
So yeah, it's the same as EC2, right? It like makes sense at some scale, and then at some giant scale that most people will never get to, maybe it doesn't make sense, but it's still like a whole investment, and the argument of the lack of focus is the biggest one that means people probably shouldn't do it. So yeah, like I for one are pretty bought into device farm. Like I really love it. I don't want to have to build a device lab to give our end users, our customers, mobile testing, which is one of the reasons why Rainforest chose you guys. So yeah, like I'm super interested, and hopefully some of our listeners are interested in like more history about device farm. So Trent, could you tell us a little bit about the genesis of device farm? How did it become an Amazon service, and why have they invested in this so heavily?
Sure. So actually the story of device farm starts with AppThwack, which was a company that I co-founded in 2012, and it was in a very similar space. It was effectively expose devices online for developers to use to test their apps. In 2012, that's only 4 years ago, but at this time, Android fragmentation was kind of the hot topic of the day, and so that was the where we started. We thought, hey, we'll take a bunch of Android devices, we'll throw them in a room and rig them up, and we'll run. At the time, we just thought fuzz tests on them, so just like random input on those devices, and try to find issues with people's apps. Now that quickly, as we started talking to developers and people started using it, it became clear that this wasn't just an Android problem. It also affected other platforms like iOS, and it was a growing issue. And it wasn't just, does my app work on it? There was a need for running, custom scripts or custom tests, or actually interacting with the devices manually. So the product in AppThwack kind of grew and grew and grew. At the same time, at AWS, there's this focus on making the lives of developers easier, providing them with sort of the nuts and bolts so that they can focus on building great products rather than sort of it's like you want to go build a house, okay, go build a house, but don't cut down a log and start creating your own 2x4s, unless you really want to, like focus on the thing that's really gonna make you happy or your customers happy. So AWS was kind of seeing the same thing. So AppThwack became part of AWS. We created Device Farm. Feature-wise, Device Farm now has like video recordings and additional functionality. The scale is much greater, and and I'll get into these points here in a moment. But that's kind of how AppFox sort of evolved into Device Farm. And again, the root of all of this is just talking to developers and seeing these, makeshift device labs. And I think, as engineers, I think we oftentimes will see a problem like, oh, we get to buy a bunch of devices and ring them up for automation. Like, it sounds like a cool weekend project or something. The problem is that it quickly goes from a weekend project to okay, we need to staff this and so on.
No, that makes total sense why this exists and existed before AWS, and definitely a needed service. So I would have hated to try and do this myself. So yeah, I'm super curious about the security side of things, because obviously a lot of customers are paranoid about security. So can you tell us a bit about the unique parts of Device Farm that are extra secure?
Sure. So Device Farm was built with security in mind from the ground up. So it starts on the hardware side. So these are real phones and tablets, right? So these are the same phones and tablets that you'd buy, you'd carry around in your pocket, your customers are carrying around. And we have lots and lots of them in a single location. So first of all, the devices are stored in a way that they can't see each other. So one customer can't open up the camera or take a video or audio recording and listen in or see what somebody else is doing on another phone. So they're physically isolated from one another. You can, of course, use the camera, use the microphone, you just won't actually pick anything up due to the way that they're stored. This also means that they're shielded from one another, so they don't actually talk wirelessly to each other. And every single device has a Wi-Fi connection that it communicates to the internet with, but that connection is unique to it. So there's no LAN, there's no shared Wi-Fi network. Every single device has its own Wi-Fi connection to the internet, and that's it. So they're not, sniffing traffic, between each other.
Cool.
And that internet connection, they do not have a public IP, so there's no way for somebody outside to sort of contact one of these devices from the outside world. And then the other part of this is on the software side. So the devices are, of course, just like if you had a device locally and you plugged it into your development machine, these devices are plugged into a host machine. However, that host machine is virtual and it's brought up on the fly when a session or when testing is occurring. And once you're done with it, once you're done with that session, done with your test, that machine is torn down and it's not reused. So your code and test execution code and all those bits and pieces are running on a fresh image and torn down afterwards.
Awesome.
And then on the device side, we uninstall applications, we wipe external data, we do a number of steps there to clean up the device, both from a security standpoint and a stability standpoint, right? To make sure that the device is in a stable state.
For those of you that want to learn a little more, I believe Trent or someone on his team wrote a pretty cool blog post explaining more of the security side and how it actually works in more detail. I will dig that out and send that with the follow-up from this. So yeah, scale-wise, super important for us at Rainforest. We have on our website, which is the majority of our business today, we have the ability to send several thousand testers to a customer's site to start doing their testing, which means their results come in really, really fast. And I know this was one of the important parts when we chose you guys, is that you have the ability to hit a good scale. So do you want to, I'd love to learn a little more about this, Trent.
Sure. So when you select a device from Device Farm, there are a few hundred for you to choose from, and so you see make, model, operating system, carrier variant, and so on. But behind of each of those few hundred, there are actually many, many instances of each one, and we actually deploy devices on the fly depending on demand. So we constantly monitor wait times and so on. So if a particular make, model, and operating system becomes more popular, we can grow capacity to handle it, so that devices are available in minutes, if not seconds, for your tests.
Yeah, we'll do a live demo on the next slide, and I'll see how quick that happens. But normally, from experimenting and from running for our customers, it's normally within a minute or so we've found, unless it's super busy time, which is super cool. So we love that about you. device farm. So reliability, Rainforest has found it super reliable, but I know you've done some special work here, so yeah, go for it.
Sure. So we maintain lots and lots and lots of devices, as you can imagine, in AWS data centers. We're constantly monitoring them. So this is the kind of thing that if you had your own local device farm, or you probably have experienced this with even if you have a pile of devices, keeping them charged, keeping them up to date, making sure that pop-ups are dismissed, that their internet connectivity is functioning. That they're in a clean state. Like all of those pieces, we're constantly monitoring the devices, making changes to them. And if a device looks like it's acting up, it's pulled off automatically. We attempt to bring it back to a stable state. If we're unable to bring it back to a stable state, the device is just simply removed and destroyed. So at scale, these are the kinds of reliability mechanisms that we can just build in to the service.
Yeah. Interestingly, I wonder if eventually you'll be able to publish reliability stats over different phones. Maybe not, but it would be interesting to see how many failures you get on different devices. Anyway, the last question I had, which I think will be interesting for our listeners, is like, how do your customers generally manage their tests and use of device farm today? Is there a common trend? A lot of people using it programmatically? Are a lot of people using the new stuff you've just launched, which lets people use the device directly in the interface? What's that split look like, and how's the trend going?
Sure. So we see developers using device farm for a couple like key use cases. So the first one is sort of starting at the beginning of development, creating a change in the application, testing iterative changes. This is where remote access can come in handy, because there probably aren't tests written yet, but you might want to make sure that some bit of new functionality is actually working properly or looks okay. And you can do that using remote access. Or they're running a suite of regression tests before a commit or something, and they're doing that using a plugin from Android Studio, for instance. There's a Gradle plugin that lets you kick tests off from the IDE. So there's that use case. Next up is, again, a programmatic interface. So cumulative builds, nightly builds, maybe it's milestone builds, whatever it happens to be. Hooking device farm into a system like Jenkins CI or Bamboo, taking tests off on the fly, pulling those results back down, maybe even programmatically analyzing them and deciding when you are actually going to fail a build. So those are the largest, the most sophisticated developers are setting up continuous delivery, setting up continuous integration using device farm programmatically. But there is another side to this, which is the verifying functionality prior to release. Typically, this is running tests across more devices, a larger set of tests. It could also mean more manual interaction with the devices and trying to find corner cases in the app. And this is all happening right before the application is actually pushed out. So during development, during normal continuous integration, it's happening on sort of an even cadence, and then here at right before release, there's this huge rush to verify functionality.
Cool. And you see that bit split between manual and automated quite often.
Yeah, and I don't know. Actually, these numbers would be really interesting to see exactly what the split is. But I think that for most developers, there's sort of like a half and half. There's this, there's the automation piece. By volume, automation clearly dominates, right? Because you can run way more tests way more often on way more devices. But as far as actual time that somebody is spending working on something, I think that there's the automation piece and there's this manual interaction piece. And the manual interaction is also important because it also allows you to reproduce customer issues. So you have, maybe the customer is even on the phone with you reporting an issue, and you can simply open up a device and have somebody walk through it with the customer.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay, so moving on. So Rainforest, why did we choose device farm? Is commonly asked to us. Basically, it was the best choice at the time. I actually still believe it is the best choice. They have, as Trent said, the most devices and also the most security around inter-device communication. And that, for a lot of our customers, has been super, super important. So for those of you that don't know what Rainforest is, I'm just going to give a super high-level overview of it. We provide QA as a service. It's powered by humans, but we give you the results at the speed of automation because we have so many humans and so many devices. We can just send your tests to the humans and parallelize them massively. So we will regularly send over 1,000 people to do your tests, and they'll be done in roughly 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the length of your suite. So Device Farm is one of our newer integrations, so we can now support testing on iOS devices. So Device Farm allows us to give our testers devices directly in the browser. So we've built a special version of, well, a special way of using Device Farm, which gives our testers physical access to the device over VNC. So this is similar to the thing that Trent has built internally, just with a higher frame rate for now, at least. So yeah, you can test any app on any device that Apple device that Device Farm supports today. Also, earlier this week, we actually launched something called Mobile Only, which is Rainforest, but self-serve sign-up. So you can sign up without going through the sales process. You can also fund your account using a credit card without entering into an annual contract with us. So it's an easy way to get started with Rainforest. So hopefully everything works, but I'm going to try and give you all a very quick live demo of Device Farm and Rainforest working together. So we have a sample app that we use to test internally. It's nothing super fancy, but it'll show you on a real phone and a quick overview of Rainforest as well. After that, I'll run into what's next. So give me 1 sec. Okay, so I'm just going to go into the Rainforest interface now. This is where we list our tests. So this is a simple test I've made earlier that helps us test Device Farm. So just looking at the thing, we're going to start from a binary that I made earlier. We're going to look at the terminal and then run through the tests. So these tests are written in plain English. They can be written by a PM or by a developer. They're very much similar or identical to the format you'd write for doing web testing with Rainforest, but instead of testing with a browser, you get a Device Farm device, which is super cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and open Preview Test. I'm going to select an iPhone 6s because I like a fast device and I have one myself, and then click Open Preview. I want to do this in production to get the right binary for me. And then this may take a few seconds, so I'll talk about the background. But this is actually going directly to Device Farm and asking for a device, so we call it allocating resources. And then it'll set up a tunnel back from the device to our browser and then show you the phone exactly as it is on Device Farm. So this is going to be a real phone embedded directly into the screen you're seeing now. So if we go back while that's doing that, you can see that we support a whole load of devices through Android devices, through iPhones of different software versions as well. Eventually, we'll be adding more devices, more Android devices. At the moment, we have coverage over most of the devices that Device Farm support on the Apple side of things. So hopefully this is starting. Yeah, it's waiting for the tunnel now. So normally this interface that you're seeing today would be used by our testers. So you'd go into Rainforest, you trigger a run or use either Circle CI or CI integration or API to start a run during your build. And then we'd allocate the devices to testers and then give you the results back in 20 to 30 minutes. So yeah, this is the joy of live demos, by the way. Sometimes they take longer. Bear with us a few seconds. So, Trent, while we're here, are there any upcoming features that are coming on Device Farm that you would like to tell everyone about?
So, yeah, sure. So one thing that is imminent is iOS 10, the addition of iOS 10 and Android N devices and support.
Yep.
Oh, and I see maybe we can hop back over to your demo now.
Yeah, we can. So super simple. If you remember back from the test before, we have the text that the tester was asked to do. So you can see, hey, is there an animated pink square? Yeah, we have a really bad pink square in here. And then we can click in the device and get the standard thing and then type in. I'm on a very slow laptop, so it's not the quickest thing. So we can type in here, we can enter some text. We can deal with alert boxes. As you can see, this is a real phone. It doesn't have any service. Trent, I think that's something that you may or may not be working on longer term, but anyway, we can control where the device is located using GPS, but we can also choose different devices for this. So this would be given to our human, and yeah, they would run through your test much like this. Click yes and no, report any bugs to you, and then you get the results super, super fast. So yeah, that's it for my overview of super fast overview. If you want to get started, by the way, you can go to rainforestqa.com and click on the product section and then click on mobile app testing. You can sign up direct, get into the product today. We have some onboarding and also the ability for you to buy credits to get started. So, Trent, do you want to cover what's next? You were halfway through when the terminal came back up.
Sure. Yeah. So today, like we mentioned, Device Farm it's been mostly focused on automated testing. We've recently, started supporting this manual interaction with devices through the browser. And I think that one thing that we're working on is we have all of these devices. What other interesting ways can we make them useful to folks, right? So like yourself, you built a service, a functionality in your service actually on top of Device Farm. This was a use case that we did not really anticipate, when we were originally designing the service. So it's kind of cool to see, stuff like that happen. And now we're talking to more and more folks, and there are all sorts of things that they can do with these devices beyond just, using our automated test infrastructure. So I think, we're talking to people, we're learning more about, what else that they could build on Device Farm. And so yeah, you'll see more and more ways that these devices can be used in all sorts of interesting ways.
Yeah, it's super exciting. For me, the iOS 10 stuff and then the built-in first-party way of talking directly to device is going to be pretty awesome. So Rainforest, as Trent mentioned, uses a custom way of talking to device and getting a super quick access to it. But Device Farm now natively supports that, so we may be moving to that. Should be no difference to the end user, just a faster connection, hopefully. So, okay, unless, Trent, you've got anything more you'd like to say, let's wrap up and take some questions.
Sounds good.
So, give me one sec. I need to move this. Okay, so I think the first question is, what was it like to join Amazon from having been at AppThreat before and being a co-founder?
Sure. So I mean, obviously, it's going from a startup environment to a really, somewhat large company. So there's all sorts of, good and bad that goes along with that. Like suddenly you don't have to worry about, who's going to replace the coffee filters or something like that. Like that all is handled for you. But on the other hand, you also, you have to figure out how things are done. Like you can't just pull out your credit card and buy something anymore. So there's that kind of trade-off. From a service perspective, I think that the most interesting thing has just been the scale, right? So we went from, we had a fairly sophisticated lab in AppThwack. We had a secure room, that we stored all the phones in. We controlled all of our own servers. But in AWS, I mean, the security requirements are just, completely.
Yeah, I'm sure it's totally next level, which is awesome. So they've already helped you get to the next level, which is what I've noticed from the outside. So I'm just reading the other question. So how many tests can you run at once from within Rainforest? So that's actually based, well, the short answer is unlimited, but I'm guessing whoever asked this question is really asking how many we can do in parallel. It depends on how many other customers are using us at the moment, but the maximum is just over 2,000 people at once. So that's 2,000 tests in parallel. So if there are no other customers running and all the testers are online, which is most days, you will actually hit that if you have enough tests to do that, which is kind of cool. So yeah, let's take an... Okay, can we get the debug logs for failing tests for a particular device? Yeah, so like Trent, we basically use the standard device farm logs So even if you're using, I'm going to answer the device farm side of this as well, unless Trent says I mess it up. But short version is device farm has support for getting the logs back out from the device. So there's just an API for that. And Rainforest uses that API and shows you the logs per device as well. So you can download them directly from our interface. So in the interface, there's a results view which shows you what has happened, what the test has done. But you can also download the logs. If you're using device farm directly, you can use the API, or I believe you can actually do that in the console, in the AWS console. Did I miss anything, Trent, on that one?
Oh, no, that was good.
Cool. So I think this one is for you, Trent, but I'll read it out for you. So when when beta iOS or Android software is available for developers, do we get the devices with these betas available to start testing our apps? So yeah, that's a Trent question.
Sure. So yes, and we are working on adding support for beta versions. So for instance, when the next iteration of Android starts to drop, we do anticipate having devices with those beta builds on them. We also hope to do the same with iOS. The only caveat here is that oftentimes these new OSs, especially the early days of those betas, the stability simply isn't there yet, or the APIs are still evolving. So there's a very small subset of our service that will actually work with those devices at the very beginning. So the timeline doesn't line up exactly with the releases of those betas.
It would be pretty difficult to do that from your point of view and guarantee it be stable. So from Rainforest side, as soon as it's supported by device farm, we should be able to add that pretty fast, depending on whether we still use our framework or not. But when we don't, we'll be able to add it like the same day that Trent releases it, which is pretty cool. So next question, can we set the location of the device remotely to test, i.e. the location of a pizza chain? So well, Trent can answer it, but basically yes. Device Farm has an API which lets you set the geolocation, plus actually another of other settings on the phone, like the Bluetooth and the other radio settings. But from Rainforest, at the moment it's hard-coded, but that's something that we're shipping pretty soon, is the ability to do that per test. We actually set the location to our office for now, so we have the ability to do it, we just haven't exposed it publicly. So next question. If we ship or upload our software for testing purposes, what measurements do you have to protect our intellectual property? So Trent, do you want to cover that from your side? It's around the security stuff, I'm guessing.
Sure, yeah. So once it gets over to device farm, so let's start with how it gets into device farm. So it starts off, the application is uploaded to us. It's done, over an HTTPS connection. It's being put into S3, and that is an S3 URL that we, device farm, own and control, and we are the only ones with access to that account. There's no API for downloading applications from device farm, so once you've uploaded an app to us, there's no way to download it again. You can delete it, you can tell us to delete it, otherwise we will automatically delete it from our service after 30 days. So it's kind of up to you how you want to do that. And again, we're the only ones with access, or our service is the only ones with access to that application. We install it on the devices. After your tests are done, we uninstall that application. We clear a number of settings from the device. We verify all of these steps. And I think I mentioned before, if it fails any of those, the device goes into a quarantine state. We have a technician that will then investigate the issue, look at the device, and attempt to get it into a stable state. If they can't, then the device is simply removed from circulation.
And then you actually destroy the device, if I remember rightly, right?
Correct, yes.
Like physically destroy. So
like
that seems
shredded.
Yeah, that seems like you should do a video, like how does it shred? But B, it seems like a pretty thorough way of doing it. So from the Rainforest side, we have a couple of things. So we do some similar stuff to Trent with your actual binary. So we store it on S3. We don't allow you to download it. We're the only ones with access. We store it with encryption on S3. And then when you want to do a run, we then just use the upload API that Trent has that puts it into his security process. From the human tester side of things, all of our testers have signed some level of an NDA. We also support them signing a custom NDA if your company wants to have their own NDA signed. Also, yeah, that's how we deal with it. We also have very detailed logs about who's had access to what binary and when, what exactly they've done to each phone, through to even network traffic logs. So it's kind of a lot of data we store about this. But yeah, so then hopefully that answers your question. So the next question is, what options do we get to test the camera functionality? So from the Rainforest side, like we support whatever device farm supports. Trent, do you want to run into, I know you said camera access is available, but what kind of options do you have there?
Sure. So yeah, if your app uses camera, video, microphone, any of the external radios or operations on the phone, you can use those in Device Farm. However, the devices are in these containers, so what you hear and what you see is going to be very limited, right? So there's low light, nothing of any interest there. However, and I think that this is probably something that you could talk to Russ about, or talk to us about, is we've seen people perform these types of tests using canned photos, for instance. So they open up the camera, they take the photo, and then they use a canned photo for the actual operation that they need to do on that photo.
Yeah. I've seen that, and or just a black photo. So yeah, actually, so I think that's covered a little more in depth in one of the blog posts from Device Farm as well, like physically what it's a cylinder, if I remember rightly. Hey Trent, that the phone is inside.
Yeah, they're in containers that
Cool.
keep them separate from one another.
Cool. So like once you see that or read the blog post, you'll have a better visualization of what you'll see from the camera. But basically, it's pretty dark. So, are there any more questions? Okay, cool. Well, thanks a lot for coming and listening to us. Hopefully, you all found this useful. If anyone has any further follow-up questions, Joe and I will be sending an email out to everyone with the link to this and the link to the slides. And then a link to the blog post we mentioned, and probably some other stuff. If you have any questions, feel free to hit us up. I know Trent's on Twitter, I'm on Twitter if you want to ask me any questions there as well. But more than happy to answer anything you want about this. So Trent, you have anything more to say before we close?
No, just thanks a lot, Russ and the folks at Rainforest, for having me, and thank you to everyone that attended.
Cool. Okay, well, thanks a lot, everyone, for coming. Take care.